Hello, this is Ellie and welcome back to my lockdown diaries, because yes, in London we are still in lockdown and I'm gonna go straight to the point. I've been reading quite a lot last year. This year I've been a bit more slow because I've been focusing on other things, but last year I read 20 books in 12 months. That was the goal I'd given to myself after a long time of struggling to concentrate and focus. So yes, I've read 20 books and I have to say most of them were fucking incredible. Buckle up and sit down, get a cup of tea, because this is it's gonna be a bit long because 20 books. Some of them are in ebook format and some of them are in physical copies. My love for physical copies will never disappear. I love reading proper paper books, but I've recently actually been reading on my phone a lot because when I'm in bed I can just move the phone wherever I want without the discomfort of moving around the book, which sounds lazy. I'm very aware of it, but it just it got me to read more and I can read wherever I want. I'm actually gonna go in order for this. Here we start. January last year, I was in Vietnam, and as you know, I was ill for a few days. Therefore, the only thing I could actually do in the sadness of my hostel's bed was reading books. I had with me a few, and one of them was Bird Box. As weird as it sounds, because I haven't watched it, I've heard the film isn't good, but I actually loved the book. The book was absolutely mental. The book is written in such a way that I think I started reading it at 7 p.m. at night and I finished it at 3 a.m. It's ridiculous, I am aware, but I could not just put that book down and not know whether they were going to make it, what was going to happen. My anxiety was so high, but in a good way, and I just couldn't let that book down and rest, and I just had to finish it. And it's insane. I heard the film isn't as good, but I loved the book. I wanted to know what was going to happen. I wanted to understand, and it just from what I gathered from a few comments that I got from the film, it's pretty different. There are quite a few differences between the two, and therefore I definitely recommend reading Bird Box if you're into horror and thriller and that sort of thing. I really love that genre, and I thought Bird Box was great. I really enjoyed it. It was such a quick read because I needed to know what was going to happen. Second book I read, always while I was in Vietnam, was The Exorcist. Weirdly enough, very different genre. The style of writing is completely different from Bird Box. Is much more dated in language and how things work. It's sometimes very vulgar, it gets very explicit and specific about certain part of the body, and isn't scary from being very gory and descriptive of horrible things like vomit and that sort of stuff. I found it an interesting read because it was very different from Bird Box, and I know I'm never gonna be able to watch the film, but I know that the film is actually meant to be extremely good for what it is. The only thing I've seen is the version on Scary Movie 3, which I don't think counts. It was Scary Movie 2. The way it's described from the point of view of the different people that are witnessing this kid being possessed by the devil is so interesting, because also you get into their stories and how they are, and they're written so well that you gather the personalities of the character extremely well, and it's just it's disturbing, but disturbing in a way that makes you feel like you want to go on and know what's happening and see what's going to happen with this kid and this priest and this woman and the mother, and everything kind of comes together so interestingly, and I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I was going to enjoy a book like The Exorcist because I'm a bit of a pussy, but no, it was great. I loved it. Other book I read during my 2019 was a book that a lot of you might have already read. It's from Adam Kay, and This Is Going to Hurt. I've got a physical copy of this because I managed to buy it. This is such a special book because, first of all, very topical. It makes you appreciate how much the NHS does for all of us and how important it is to have public health, and how underrated and underpaid, and the horrible condition in which some doctors have to live in because of the understaffing, underpayment, and how the system works. It really makes you think. It's gonna hurt because it makes you understand how a lot of things that you don't think of and you just take for granted, they've got people behind it, and there's stories and there's lives, and you just don't understand how hard it is until someone tells you. And this was I don't want to say a wake-up call because I kind of had an idea about what this was about, and I had an idea about the how the state of the NHS, because, well, a friend of mine is a nurse and she has been vocal about it. I would definitely recommend reading this. It's really heartbreaking though, so like it makes you really angry at the system, but it's a very, very good read. Now the next one is going to be what is probably one of my favorite books of all time, and I recommend to everyone to read this book because it's gonna change your life. The Courage to Be Disliked is written by 2 Asian writers, and it is written as a philosophical dialogue. Like if you were reading a dialogue between like a philosopher and his student. It is incredible. It makes you think about so many things that have to do with the way we live, the way we think, the way we feel bad for ourselves and for the others, and how we think and perceive ourselves, and what we dream and what we aspire and what makes us sad. It is incredible. It is something, and it explains it to you in such a logical way, and sort of like it explains to you exactly how things work. And even though you know how they are, the fact that this book tells you makes a huge difference. It wakes up certain ways of you to think that are ingrained in your brain. I don't even know if the sentence that I just said made sense, but now that you're aware of them, you can change them. And I made actually a list of the things that I learned from this book, and I hang them in front of my mirror so that I can read them and remember them, because I have a terrible memory because I read so much and I digest so much information that I don't always remember it well. But yes, this book is just like pure gold. I recommend everyone reads it. It's so good. A friend of mine read it as well recently, and he said the same thing, and I was so excited. It's genuinely so good. It's based on the work of people like Adler, Freud and Jung, and it's brilliant. Now this is one of the books that I probably liked the least of all the ones I read, which I never like to say about books, because books are all great. Well, not all, you know what I mean. And it is Dolly Alderton, Everything I Know About Love. I read it because I was really drawn by the title. It seemed like the description was very interesting. I liked the cover, admittedly. This book is based on Dolly Alderton's personal experience with growing up, being a fuck up, kind of not respecting herself and not giving herself away, and treating herself and others the wrong way, and how therapy and learning about her selfishness and herself helped her understanding all of those things about love. And it's not necessarily a positive thing, but it's a very interesting journey to go through. Didn't particularly enjoy it because it's not my cup of tea to read about. It felt a lot like reading a blog of someone that I don't know if I would necessarily like. So that was the reason why I didn't think it was amazing. Sometimes some things that she did I would judge, but that's just done to me, and maybe I shouldn't even judge. But I read this one. If anyone's interested in it, it's an interesting read, to be honest. It just wasn't my favorite of all the ones I've read. Next one on the list, it's a book that you've probably seen in the libraries in the past year, everywhere, and it's the Tattooist of Auschwitz. I actually got that book as an ebook thinking that it was an old book. It is a heart-wrenching read, like reading what happened inside there from the perspective of the main character looking for Chica, this girl that he's falling in love with, and they're inside this camp and he's trying so hard to, like, it makes you understand the atmosphere inside the camp and how things worked and how people lived and what tricks there were and how many people died. It's very, very, like, it's a heavy read in that sense. Like, it is Auschwitz after all. It's like, it's the Holocaust. You can't avoid feeling absolutely, like, horrified by everything that goes on in there, but it's a very, very nice story. Admittedly, at some point I was a bit like, this is dragging on a bit, but like, it was interesting because I liked the book, but I wasn't a massive fan of the characters, as weird as it is to say. And then I found out that it's a true story. So I was like, I can't dislike the characters. Are true people. They're real people. Like this, they went through this. It's not just a book. So it kind of like went away. It wasn't just like people created to go through it. It was people who actually did. And it's very, very, very nice story. It's just The main character is the one that's tattooing the numbers on everyone's arm, and therefore he's got a privileged position kind of within the camp, and he's trying to find this girl, and it's a nice story. I liked it. Now the next book, it's from a friend of mine. It's from Savannah Brown, which some of you might know, and it is The Truth About Keeping Secrets. This book I didn't expect to like as much. In terms of like, I know Savannah and I know she's a very talented writer, but I was going through a phase of not really wanting to read young adults. I was trying to read, as you've seen, a bit more mature books. So I was like, I don't know if I want to read this. I think I'm going to like it, but I don't think it's going to be the genre I'm looking for. And it completely changed my mind. I already told her, but I think it's written marvelously. Like, you know, you get some YouTubers who write books that write really average books, and then you get some that are extremely talented writers and that write really fucking great books, and I think that's what Savannah's done. I think The Truth About Keeping Secret is so well written. Like, I love the style, love the prose, and the characters were so interesting, and the way everything ties together at the end, I think it's so cool. It includes LGBT issues and stuff like that as well, but not too deeply, and it's a mystery thriller kind of thing. Really cool story, really gripping. I loved reading it. Savannah did an amazing job, and I'm not saying this because I know her. It's a great book. I definitely recommend you guys read it. Very, very good book. We're now getting into a new wave of books that I started reading, and I fell in love with this Irish author. She is so good. I loved reading her books, because both of them I thought were absolutely incredible. I think I read Normal People first, apart from the fact that the cover is such a clever image. Like, I love this graphic of the two people inside a sardine tin. It's just so cool. It's a story of a guy and a girl, as obvious as this may sound, and it's written from the perspective of one and the other, jumping between chapters, which you might have heard already, or that kind of thing has been done before. But the way in which it describes their relationship and the way things go is so honest. It's so real. It's so true, and like, I can actually relate to the pain and certain thoughts that sometimes that kind of book don't really put out there. The sexuality, the betrayal, the cheating, the whatever goes on. It's raw, it's very honest, and I loved reading this book. It's great. I recommend it to so many people. And funnily enough, the next one I read from her was recommended by a friend of mine, Luke Catfoot, and it's Conversation with Friends. Conversation with Friends is another book from Sally Rooney, and I hope I pronounce her surname right, because you never know with Irish. But this book is just as great. This is still a love story. Frances is the main character. I think she's around my age. She does spoken words, and she gets approached by this lady, Melissa, who's like really into spoken word and poetry, and I think she writes or something like that. She's friends with a little writer, and she loves their work so much that eventually she invites them at their house, where she, Frances, meets her husband and falls in love with him. So it's a weird triangle between like this married couple and this girl, and it's just, normally I'd be repulsed by that kind of story because I'm really against cheating and that kind of thing, but it's the writing. There's something about Sally Rooney's writing that is insanely good. It's so raw and real, and I can feel it. So I didn't hate it, and it was great. I just love the style. It touches your soul, it touches your heart. It's very real, which sometimes in this kind of stories you can get a bit obvious. You know what I mean? And I think like this is a lot nicer, but definitely read Sally Rooney. The next book I read was what the famous Netflix show You was based on, and it's the book You. Very disturbing, but I liked it because it doesn't scare away from being a bit sometimes like freaky. I think maybe a bit better than the show, even though I haven't watched it all. It makes you understand how sick some people are in the mind. Like, reading that book sometimes made me feel so uncomfortable. I was like crawling out of my skin. It was really weird. For those of you who don't know, it's a story of this guy who's a bit of a stalker. a bit, who falls in love with this girl that he meets in the bookshop where he works. And as soon as he decides that they are meant to be together, he's obsessed over her and follows her around, tricks her life into like meeting him, and people around him. He manipulate everything so clearly and easily and like professionally almost. That is just disgusting. And at the end of it, you realize he's not the only really horrible person in the book. Just saying. It was a good read in terms of like very well written. It's not easy to get into the mind of someone like that for that long, especially for a writer. It just like all the characters are so interesting and so vicious, and it was just horrible to look at really and read. But I really enjoyed it. Like when you get to the end, you're just like, oh my god. Like, it's one of those books, but I definitely recommend it. I enjoyed it. The next book is a bit of a weird one. Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of this video that I did record on the other video, but that the memory card didn't record because it ran out of space. So I'm doing it again. So welcome back, and let's get back into the books that I read last year. I think we were left at The Vegetarian. The Vegetarian was a brilliant book. It's written by an Asian writer. Therefore, you know that when I read anything by Asian writers, I always have this thing about how they write about very painful thing, but it always seems extremely delicate and graceful, and it breaks your heart even more. Vegetarian does this. It's the story of this woman who decides to stop eating meat and fish, therefore become vegetarian, and I think at some point she stops eating animal products altogether. But it's written almost like a fairy tale, like a legend kind of thing. Her husband and her family are not approving of this. They're very against it. They keep trying and making her eat meat. They try and making her like come back to her reasons and to her senses. But she just doesn't want to do it. Like, she's so sure, and she decided that that's what she wants to do, because what she wants to do is feel close with nature. And it's written, said like this, it might sound, if you think about it in a European and westernized world kind of way, doesn't sound as good as in an Asian world the kind of way it would be, because it's a lot about thinking and philosophy and ethics and just, it's so delicate. It's like a story, it's like a fairy tale. It's not as much like a novel, and I think it was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. It was a really, really good read. I love reading books from Asian writers, you know, I'm a big fan, and this was absolutely great. Another book that I read by an Asian writer, for example, was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous was a fantastic book. The writing is insane, and I think I hadn't read anything written by a Vietnamese author before, and I loved it. It's the story of this little dog, which is the name of the kid and the main character of the book. And it's a story of a relationship with his mom and the relationship with masculinity and his world and the war, and how he's come to grow up to be who he is with his own feelings, his own sexuality, discovering the world. And it's all a love letter to his mom, trying to make her understand the tumultuous world that he's going into, and how he feels and how he's been treated, and what happened to him when he was younger and now, and who he meets and how he feels. It's all in relationship with the mom and her story and what she has been through in Vietnam. A really, really, really lovely book. I found it so... It was like a sad hug. I don't know how best to describe this, but it was like a sad hug. I loved it. It was so nice. This one was definitely one of the best one I read. We now adventure ourselves in that time of the year when I was like, I think I want to read some thrillers. Because I had seen Gone Girl, loved it for the first time. I started thinking that maybe I needed more thriller in my life. Therefore, I started reading thriller books, which I kind of always avoided because I don't like crime. I don't like that kind of mystery books, but I found out I actually love thrillers. So I read mainly two books that really stayed with me, and they're the two books that I read last year. One of them is The Silent Patient. The Silent Patient is one of my favorite books of all time. It is absolutely brilliant. It's the story of this psychologist who works in this psych ward, and he gets himself there because he's fascinated by the story of this woman who's in there and doesn't talk at all. Her story was quite famous in news, I think, if I don't remember wrong, and he just wants to find out what happened. So he starts trying to like get close to her and understand her story, but she doesn't speak. She doesn't speak a word, and she's clearly been traumatized and she's going through a lot of like PTSD. But the story is much more creepy than it's set out to be. A lot of things are not what they were, and what happened in the end is just creepingly mind-blowing. It is one of those moments when you go like, and it was fantastic the way it's written. It talks so much about psychology as well, and like psychological trauma and what goes on in the brain, how people react to things, which is something I'm already pretty, into. So that was absolutely fantastic to have to read. So Silent Patient, one of the best thrillers I've ever read. Other thriller I read was from the same author that wrote Gone Girl, but since I didn't want to read Gone Girl because I had seen the film and I don't like reading books that I already kind of like know the story of that much, I went for another one. I decided to go for Sharp Objects, which is the creepiest story. There's a journalist. She goes back to her hometown because she's sent there to investigate and like find out more news about this thing that happened. They found the girl dead in the forest by a canal with no teeth. And nobody can understand who did this and who's the author of it. And she's kind of like trying to go there because she needs a bit more news, and her newspaper boss just sent her there. She doesn't like going back there. She doesn't have good memories of the place, and she has a very difficult relationship with her mom. And this will develop into something extremely complicated, everything started like circling around until you get to the answer and you realize what happened there and what has been going on and what is still going on. And it is it's so fucked up that it's so good, so well written, such a great thriller. I definitely recommend it. It's such a good story. If you like that sort of like creepy stuff that you think something's going on but you can't figure out what it is, that's what you want to do. The next book I read was Life Lessons from a Brain Surgeon. It was a very interesting book that dealt a lot with what goes on in the brain and how someone that works with the brain finds himself working and talking and doing things with it. It was absolutely incredible. I absolutely loved it. It was just like, I love hearing about the neuroscience and what happens in the brain in the physical side of it, like sites and bits that are dedicated to certain things and how they map the brain and how some kind of disease attacks certain bits of it and what happened. It was just like so interesting from a scientific and like academic point of view, but also from an emotional and sentimental point of view, because it was just it's hard to do a job like that, and so many people don't really understand it as much. So it kind of made me feel similar to what This Is Going to Hurt did, and I definitely recommend it. It was a really, really interesting read, and I love this kind of stuff, so I was very, very like fascinated by it. Now I wish I could jump straight past this book because it's written by Stephen Chbosky, who's the writer of The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which is a book that I really, really deeply love. And apparently he decided to write a Christian fantasy. I don't want to give too many spoilers about this. It's a very weird book where it starts just by a kid disappearing in the forest and people not knowing where he is, and then when some people move in the same house, the kids start being sort of like taken away again and nobody knows what's going on. It is a Christian fantasy. I just want to put it out there because when I started reading the book, just curious to know what Stephen Chbosky has been going on throughout all of these new years, and I should have just left it there because it's like 800, 900 pages of way too much stuff that I didn't want to read. The next book I read was Daisy and the Six, and I actually thought Daisy and the Six was a real band. So after I finished the book, I went online, I think I was halfway through the book. I went online looking for the band and the songs and whatever they were talking about because I wanted to hear what they were composing, what was going on. I wanted to read their story. Turns out it's a made-up band. It's a story of this band that was called The Six and their dynamics in between all of the characters and the main guy from the band, and this Daisy, who's a really strong feminine character. She likes to write, she's into drugs and alcohol, she has no control over herself, and at some point they find themselves working together, and it's the story of how this band wrote songs and how they went on tour, what happened when they went on tour, rehab, and it's just like so cool. It's like reading the story of a real band from the point of view of different people from the band. It was brilliant. I thought it was real real, and I'm so upset. And eventually it turned out that they're making a show about it, so I can't wait to see that, because I think it's going to be extremely interesting. And I was such a fan of how they created everyone's personality. All the characters feel so real. I thought it was real. And we are getting close to the end. The book that I read after this was Becoming by Michelle Obama, and I actually really loved it because having an insight on the First Lady's life and to see how she went from being in school in Chicago and how she grew up and she went to Harvard and met Obama, and then she became his wife and had kids and First Lady, and everything that went on in her life, and the perception she had of everything that happened from the perspective of someone that's not born into that kind of atmosphere. I found it extremely fascinating. It's so interesting to see the journey that Obama had and that the whole White House had and did from the perspective of the First Lady. And a First Lady like Michelle Obama was a wonderful human, and I really, really enjoyed reading what happened and her perception and her reflection over all the things that were going on through the campaign that I wasn't aware of, because first, I'm not American and I didn't read too much about it, but it's just so interesting to read, and I found it really, really, really cool. So I definitely recommend reading it. It's a very empowering read, and I just enjoyed reading what was going on all the time. Really, 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 really good book. And I know that it's coming to series now. It's a documentary series, and I'm so excited to see it. And now, last book that I read last year was Brain on Fire, My Year of Madness, which is actually a film on Netflix. And I did not watch the film, but I read the book, and it is partly heartbreaking and partly full of hope. It's an actual story. It's like a memoir written by the main character, and she basically at some point contracted something that a new illness that basically made her brain slowly collapse and regress to basics, and nobody knew why, because it's such a rare disease. And it's a story collected by her, things that she remembers, people things that people remember and that have told her, CCTV videos that have been made of all the situation that was going on at the time, and it's just collection of everything that has been going on and her recovery. It is insane that someone for I think it's a protein malfunction or something like that in the brain, something so silly and easy, completely changed her personality until it got to a ground zero of her not being able to do anything. It was very fascinating to see where it got from there to the recovery and her experience and other people's experience of it. So I would definitely recommend it. We got to the end of my recommendation and my review of all the 20 books that I've read in 2019. I'm already reading other books for 2020, so I might be able to do another one next year once I'm done with it, because I've set myself another challenge, and I hope that's gonna be interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed any of the books that I already named, if you already read them, if you want to read them, or if you've got any advice or suggestion of books that I should be reading, then I definitely hope that you will write it in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up and maybe subscribe. It helps me out a lot, and it's really fun to see a community growing. Let me know how you're doing. Let me know how the COVID-19 era is treating you, and I hope you're all feeling safe and you're all in a good place. I will see you in the next video. Hopefully my sister will stop playing the drums at some point. But thank you very much for staying with me, and I'll see you in the next video.